Welcome back to Stories Sustain Us, where we dive deep into the lives and journeys of those working to make a positive impact on our world. Today's inspiring guest is Monika Maeckle. Monika's life story is rooted in her experiences as an immigrant and her profound love for nature, a passion sparked by childhood days spent outdoors, which has evolved into a lifelong dedication to conservation. In this episode, Monika shares her transformative journey into the world of monarch butterflies, a path that began with a simple fascination and grew into a full-fledged mission. She'll take us through the art and science of tagging these butterflies, the thrill of the annual monarch migration, and the urgent need to protect these delicate pollinators. From her blog, Texas Butterfly Ranch, to the Mayor's Monarch Pledge in San Antonio, Monika has found ways to make conservation accessible and meaningful for her community. Monika's story highlights the interconnectedness of life on Earth and shows us that something as small as planting a garden can help preserve the fragile web of life we all rely on. Let me tell you a bit more about Monika before we jump into her story. Monika Maeckle is a longtime journalist and nature writer based in San Antonio, Texas. Her first book, The Monarch Migration, Its Rise and Fall, was published in 2024. And her next book, which is Plants with Purpose, 25 Plants That Multitask in Warm Climates, well, that comes out next spring in May of 2025. Monika graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with an American Studies degree, hook 'em horns, and Monika applies a holistic lens to all her endeavors. For years, she has worked to raise awareness of monarch butterflies, pollinators, native plants, and the ecosystems that sustain us all. She's a master gardener, monarch butterfly tagger, recovering beekeeper, and a curious student of nature who loves the whole life cycle. With a long career in media and marketing, including stints in Central America and New York City, Monika has a national following for her website, the Texas Butterfly Ranch. She founded San Antonio's Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Festival in 2016 and co-founded with her husband Robert Rivard San Antonio's independent nonprofit news site, The Rivard Report, in 2012. The site became the San Antonio Report in 2018, and Monika continues to serve as a contributor, covering urban nature. There's so much more to Monika's story, but it's best if I let her tell you. So join Monika and me as we explore the power of storytelling and environmental advocacy, the beauty of monarch butterflies as ambassadors for ecological awareness, and the resilience needed to foster hope and drive change. This is an episode you won't want to miss, so let's get started here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Monika, welcome to Stories Sustain Us. How are you doing?
How about you, Stephen?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you. It's been a while, so it's always nice talking with you. Hope you're doing well back in Texas.
Surviving the heat. We finally got a break this week. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, and well, thank you so much for taking time for joining me. I can't wait to get to talking about your book. It's a great read, by the way. I'm about halfway through it. It is absolutely, I love nonfiction, and this is such a beautifully written book. It just pulls you in. It's not just like facts and figures. It's really a story, and it's so colorful, and it's so, I'm loving it. So I can't wait to talk to you about it here in a few minutes. But let's talk about you first. What's your story, Monika? Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how you got to be who you are today.
Well, I grew up in Dallas, in the Dallas area, and outside Dallas in a suburb of Richardson. And I think one of the defining traits of my upbringing is I'm a first-generation American. So my parents came over from Germany in 1953 after World War II. And the plan was my father, who had a very difficult childhood, father who was not the nicest guy to him, he wanted to prove that he was a good man. And so he said, my mother and he were going to come make $1 million. And then I think his plan was to go wave it in my grandfather's face and say, see, I'm actually a good guy. But they came over, and my brother and I were born here. And as I say in my book, and I think, and I'm completely transparent about how this colors my point of view, that, migrating is very hard. Migration is a very difficult thing, and
Yeah.
creatures migrate because they have to, or they feel compelled to. But it is very, very difficult and challenging. And so when my parents got here and everything was so hospitable, my father was a tradesman, a carpenter, had a building company, built custom homes in the Dallas area. My brother and I were born here. Everything they needed was here, welcoming community, good job, receptive economy. And so why would they go back? I mean, why would they return after having left everything they know and loved when everything was
Yeah.
going so well? So that really colors my point of view about monarch butterflies, as well as, like, as the climate's changing and the environment's changing, why would a creature undertake this arduous, often fatal journey if everything they need is available locally?
Yeah.
So anyway, I grew up as a child of German immigrants. We were kind of like a very nuclear family. It was not cool to be German in Dallas,
Yeah,
Texas
I
in
was
the
going to
60s.
ask you about that. Dig a little bit deeper. Yeah, there's. I'm assuming there was some post World War II hangover. So yeah, tell me about that. Just
So
the
I mean, our
difficulty
family
of
really
being a
stayed.
German immigrant.
Our family stayed to itself. We had a small, community of other German immigrants, and there were polka parties and Musik, and I learned German. I visited I met my grandparents for the first time. I guess I was 8 months old, but then the one time I remember, I was like 8. And so there was always this sort of, distant family that we didn't know. And
Yeah.
also, we didn't have a support group of family. Like, I had like 2 cousins in the whole world that I knew. I had one aunt. And so it was a very nuclear family, very tight. And I think I've continued that tradition with my own family. We're a very tight family, which, is a pretty good thing. I'm proud of everyone in my family, but I think it does shape you and makes you sort of independent in a way that maybe other situations don't. So anyway, I went to the University of Texas, the first person in my family to get a college education. Got an American Studies degree, started out in journalism, but then realized I wasn't going to read a lot of books in journalism. So I wanted to be a journalist, but I took American Studies, which I think really also shaped my perspective, which is more of a kind of holistic view of the world, reading lots of stuff, drawing conclusions, critical thinking, all of that. And I found
Yeah.
I just loved it. And it really, really shaped the way I view the world. And it's completely apparent in this book about, looking at all these different elements, using the monarch butterfly migration as a lens to examine sustainability, climate change, cartels, politics, everything. And I think it
Yeah.
makes those issues accessible, but also educates people about, the issue at hand, which is, the decline of insects.
Yeah. Can I back you up in time a little bit? Before you got to college, you talked a little bit about there's this insatiable desire to read and learn and critical thinking. I'm assuming that started at a younger age. That wasn't something that you just kind of discovered that you had an interest and a passion for in your college years. So I mean, am I telling the right story in my head that you were as a child, preteen, teenager, high schooler, you were already kind of going down that path of loving to read and loving to explore and learn and pick apart and understand the world around you? Is that kind of an accurate description of a younger you?
I think I was very much nature focused, outdoor focused. I was kind of a tomboy. My father came from a farming family, and so we always had gardening. We had a small farm, as we called it, about 40 miles north of Dallas, where we would go for the weekends. And my father had, I think, like 30 cows for a while, and we had all these adventures, gating frogs, fishing, hiking, exploring the ghosty, spook house next door. But yeah, I was always outdoorsy and always really loved being outside. And one of my favorite things to do as a child, when I was like a teenager or a kid, was I would come home from school, have a snack, and then go down to the creek. That's what we call it. We're going down to the creek. We'd be
Yeah.
down at the creek from like 4 to 6 until dinner, and then come home at dark. And we just have adventures. And I'll never forget, there was this really cool crashed up. We called it the crashed up car, and there was a car was embedded in a hill down by the creek. And of course, we figured that this is where Bonnie and Clyde, were murdered, or because there were
Yeah.
bullet holes in the hills. We made up stories, and we all
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
stories. part of I always like to write, and I was looking back on that recently because I think the reason I like to write is because there was nobody, we didn't have a family narrative except that we came from Germany. And so I wanted to make sure that the narrative was told. And I think that's sort of continued through my life. And my husband loves Winston Churchill. And I always love this quote that he keeps telling me. He's like, history will be kind to me because I intend to write it. So, if you want history to be kind, then write your own story and tell your own story and embrace the narrative. So I guess I'm kind of doing that too.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for giving me that insight too. I mean, I that ties back into the immigrant family and not, leaving behind that story and coming here, to the States with a blank slate, but there's positives and hardships associated with that as well. So I appreciate that insight about, your desire to create that narrative for your life and for your family. And I can see that thread, knowing you now for many years, I can see that thread still in you today, that narrative is an important aspect of who you are. So that's a great tie. And thank you for giving me that little insight into a younger you. And I think it sounds like that was very formative, that shaped your life in many ways.
Yeah, it was funny when I went to UT. I always tell this story because when my sons, and like I know, everybody I know who has kids that grow up and, okay, we're going to go look for, you fly to different places and you tour the campuses and you're going to go on the tours and everything. It's like when I went, I applied to one school, UT Austin. I got in, and when it was time to go to school, I just got in my car and I drove myself to Austin. I'd never been there before. My parents had no interest. They were very intimidated by college and the whole concept.
Sure.
And I remember showing up at the dorm and like the RA, the resident assistant said, okay, well, orientation's tomorrow. I was like, oh, okay, what's that? I should just go down to this building. And I went to orientation and they told me, all about the different classes and everything. And then while we were there were all these young women outside and they were saying, you need to pledge Greek. You need to go Greek. And I was like, Greek? I'm German. And I didn't have any idea what they were talking about pledging to a sorority. I was like, I didn't know what that was. I'd never heard of it. And so, that just kind of gives you an insight into, you could say the ignorance or maybe, a blessed ignorance, I don't know, of, what it's like to grow up in that situation. And I have great empathy for all the immigrants here in San Antonio that come here and have these challenges. And I know a good friend of mine at Trinity University is Kelly Lyons is in charge of a program that now mentors first generation Americans through college, because when you go to college, there's just all this stuff that's new, you don't understand, and it allows you to sort of, find your way. But I didn't have that. And so, we figured it out and I did fine. So, but I think it's funny in hindsight.
No, it's definitely an adventure. I was, my mother was the first person in my family to go to college, but I can relate to, showing up to college as well, 18 and just unclear as to some of the processes and some of the things that, it was a whole new world because it wasn't, deeply embedded in my family history as well. And it was always, I was raised to like, you're going to go to college. Higher education is important. And that was something that we were going to pursue. But there was a lot of it that was just new to my family and me in particular as well. So I can relate to that story that you just shared about some of these things were brand new. You didn't know what they were talking about. So
did you go Greek, Stephen? That's what I want to know.
I did not. I was a soccer player, so my tribe was on the soccer field, so I had my built-in kind of group to be associated with. So
universal language. There you go.
Yep. So you're moving through. Tell me a little bit more about life in Austin in your college years and.
Yeah, it was the 70s in Austin, so like I try not to be that person that was like, I remember when I go to Austin now, place, but it was really magical. Armadillo, Antone's.
The Armadillo, yeah.
My best friend for life, Peggy Garvell, kind of like knew the ropes and introduced me to all these, music and the blues and whole group of friends, and that was very fun. And then when I graduated, I got a job at the Dallas Times-Herald, which was one of two newspapers in Dallas at the time. And I met my husband there, Robert Rivard. And several years later, we got married, and we lived down in Central America for several years. He was a foreign correspondent for the Times-Herald initially, and then Newsweek, and I was a freelance writer down there. So we lived in El Salvador and Costa Rica, and we learned Spanish and traveled all over. We went to the Falklands War. We were in Nicaragua. We were in Honduras, and so that was a real adventure. And I really kind of like adventure, and I get bored easily. So that was really, really fun. When I look back on it now, I'm kind of shocked about it, because if I had a daughter who did that, it's like, I'm not sure this is a good idea. And that's how my mom was. She was kind of like, whoa. But my father was like, let her do her thing. And I was like, okay, cool. Thanks, Dad. So, we were there for 4 years. Then we moved to New York City. We had our first son when I was in El Salvador. We had the baby in Dallas. And then we moved to New York City because Bob got a big promotion. I was chief of correspondence for Newsweek magazine, and we lived in New York for 5 years before coming to San Antonio in 1989. We've been here ever since. So, really wanted to get back to Texas. We had 2 sons by then, and they were in daycare. I was working full time at a wire service, and I would get on the bus in the morning, drop the kids off, and then pick them up on the way home. And they started to have lovely caretakers, but they started to have these New York accents and say dog and talk and walk. And no offense to anyone, but I was like, this is not happening. They're going to have Texas accents. And so I told my husband, okay, it's my turn to drive. And, we need to go back to Texas and be closer to my parents where they can enjoy their grandchildren and we can have some more support. So we made the decision to come back here, and Bob started working at the San Antonio Light newspaper, which is now out of business, and eventually became the editor of Express News here. And, I've had many jobs since then, but that's how we ended up in San Antonio. And I'm really glad we ended up here. I love Texas. I love the hill country. This is where my roots are, and I'm really happy to be home.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit then, as we're getting back into Texas and starting the tie-in to your book, your passion for monarchs, I'm assuming, then started in this 1990s era. And I know you certainly as a child you were already kind of down by the creek and playing with bugs and everything. But did your interest in specifically in the monarch butterfly, tell me a little bit about that story. You write about it, but how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, it was definitely later, and I was a busy working mom. I mean, we had 2 sons. My husband traveled a lot. I was working full time. I was always a gardener, and always trying to get outside as much as possible. But I didn't have the time or the energy, to really dig into the monarch thing until I was an empty nester. And I had this incredible experience when I was in like 2004. Our family we had acquired a small piece of property on the Atlanta River, and we built a house out there, brought water in, and did all of that, and enjoyed going out there on the weekends and stuff. And I have my friend from college, Peggy, her sister Jenny Singleton. She had a ranch nearby in Menard. We were near Mason, and one weekend she invited us to come tag monarch butterflies on the river. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, just come on out. It's this cool thing in October. I was like, okay. So we got in the car. We drove to Menard, which is like a 30 or 40-minute drive, and we were waiting for these butterflies to drop from the sky, as she promised. And when we got there, I was like, where's all the butterflies? She said, well, just wait. So we waited, and literally as the sun was setting, hundreds and hundreds of these monarch butterflies just dropped from the sky. And Jenny has been doing these monarch butterfly weekends for years. She had these long PVC pipes with butterfly nets in them, and the guys would swing way high into the trees to swoop 30 or 40 butterflies in one net, bring them to the ground, and then everybody else would pitch in and put tags on them. And we'd even have so many that we'd have to put them in ice chests temporarily because we couldn't get to them quickly enough, and then we would tag them, record the data, release them. And I was just like, I couldn't believe this was happening. I was like, how did I not know about this? I was just so enchanted that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands probably of these butterflies were gathering. And I had never heard of this, and I didn't know anything about it. And so we left there that night, and the next day, Sunday, we had to get back in the car, go back to work. And then Monday when I got to work, could not stop thinking about monarch butterflies. And I just started to do this deep dive, researching monarch butterfly migration. What's that? And I, dug in, and I just couldn't stop. And the following year, after having read about it, I bought tags from Monarch Watch, which is the citizen science organization at the University of Kansas St. Lawrence that oversees the monarch butterfly citizen science tagging program. But like 50, 100 tags from them, and I thought, they've got to be here on our ranch. And so one day in October, I got my kayak out and I set out to find them, and I was just paddling along and found this place, on the other side of the river. It was very similar to Jenny's setup, where you have tall trees, kind of a limestone escarpment that generates heat in the evening. You've got a river for water. You've got flowers and nectar. It's like, and I literally stepped out of my kayak. When I stepped out, this eruption of monarch butterflies was just flittering around. I was like, oh my God, they're here. I can't believe it. It was crazy. And I started tagging. I tagged like 25 butterflies in 15 minutes. I went back to the house, got another sheet of tags, got another 25 tags. And the next day I dragged my husband over there, and we tagged another 50 butterflies. And it was just like, that was it. I was hooked. It was like this magical outing that I will never forget. And every year, I was just there last weekend, I go back to that spot, which I call the Monarch spot, and check it. Unfortunately, this year, there was nothing there. It was really sad.
Oh, no.
So, peak monarch migration for our latitude is October 10th to 22nd, and my birthday is October 13th. So typically, I have a Monica's Monarch birthday party at the ranch, and I invite people out, and we go tag. And this year was the first year that it was incredibly disappointing in my memory. There were just a couple butterflies there. So, the weather's been very strange this year with the hot weather and the wet August, and very hot weather north of here. It's just been very challenging. It'll be interesting to see how things shape up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for tell me that story again. I read it in the book, and your writing is so vivid. I was there with you, and just reading it and being familiar with that part of Texas, that Texas Hill Country area. For those who aren't familiar, the area is kind of northwest of San Antonio, west of Austin, and in that kind of what's called the Hill Country area of Texas. Your writing paints such a vivid picture. I was there, in the kayak with you going across the river. I could see it in my mind's eye. You just made it so vivid and with your storytelling, that I can see it now in my mind, where you are. Even though I've never been there, I've been there with you, and it's sad to hear that this year's the such a small showing of monarchs this year. And you talk a lot about the different impacts of what kind of the monarch migration has been over the last 50 years since they were kind of their wintering roost was discovered in Mexico, which, by the way, you also painted so vividly. I'd seen that iconic picture before, but the way you told the story of how that iconic picture came to be, again, it's just such beautiful writing. So do you want to I don't want to take away from your story yet, because I appreciate learning more about you, but we seem to be getting into a transition here more into the story of the monarch as well. So maybe you can continue to weave your story in now with the story of the monarch and some of what you are sharing with us in your book. So where do you want to go next? Is there more to Monica's story, or do you want to start transitioning into the monarch story?
I think they're very interwoven, and like so many wonderful things in life, it was not something I planned to do. It was just something that happened, and it was like, it's an opportunity that presented itself. And interestingly, right at that time when I kind of got seduced by monarch butterflies, my job at Business Wire, the wire service where I worked, was changing. And there was this thing called the internet. Have you heard about it, Stephen? And it was sort of
I've
really,
looked into it. It might be something someday.
it was intruding on the newspaper business. My husband was a newspaper editor, and the
Sure,
commercial wire
sure.
service I worked for, Business Wire, was very tied into the newspaper business because it was basically a way for companies to send press releases on the AP that then fed into the business sections of the newspaper on like sort of a sidebar wire. And as the internet came about, it was like, whoa, this is really going to change everything. And so I got
Yeah,
a new job as vice president of new media at the company where I worked to sort of learn how this was going to impact, educate our clients about how to deal with press releases, how to, what is a blog and all of that stuff. And I was assigned the task of creating the company blog. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to start a blog for myself. And I'm going to do it on butterflies. And I set up a blog called the Texas Butterfly Ranch on WordPress. And I was like, I can do experiments over here. And if I script, so what? It's my thing. There's no risk. And so I would like do stuff on my blog, the Texas Butterfly Ranch, so I could apply to my business life. And so I was like, okay, cool. This is great. And so that's how the Texas Butterfly Ranch started, which is my website now that I use for all kinds of things. I write, about pollinator advocacy. We've had, pollinator habitat program. We did the Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Festival here in San Antonio. But that's how that happened. So I think that's really, another metaphor, if you will, to keep with butterfly
yeah,
language about how things just kind of come together and everything's interconnected. And I just find this theme in my life. And my sons make fun of me because whenever they're going through a transition, I say, oh, you're just morphing to the next stage or whatever, So I
yeah,
can take that and like pretty much apply butterfly stuff to, just about anything that comes up in life. So I think that's an important aspect. But I started, writing about monarchs and pollinators and, sort of getting to know the scientists. And then we had the drought in 2011, which was, honestly feels very familiar. Like I'm having a little deja vu with what's been going on this year. But
yeah, sure.
that really set in motion all of the monarch conservation advocacy that we're witnessing right now. And I go into that a lot in my book about, we had this drought. They compared it to the drought of the 50s. The following 2 years, we had the lowest count of migrating monarchs since records have been kept. All of this Obama started a national pollinator strategy to save the bees and increase pollinator habitat and plant pollinator plants. And one of the aspects of that came about was the National Wildlife Federation started the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which is a program basically focused on the I-35 corridor, which is the migratory flyway for many insects, creatures, wildlife, and went and approached cities along that corridor to get them to commit to pledging to plant, to sort of change habitat in favor of pollinators. And there were like 26 things on the list that you could do. And
Yeah,
just you had to do 3 things, and to be in the leadership circle, you did 8 things. And so when they came and approached San Antonio, I was very involved with that. And, we're trying to get the mayor to sign the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Worked with the mayor for a while, Mayor Ivy Taylor. And
hmm,
ultimately, San Antonio signed on and said they were going to do all 26 things on the list. And it's like, whoa. And the National Wildlife Federation was kind of taken aback by that because they didn't really think anybody would do that. But because of the San Antonio River Authority, which, Stephen, you're very familiar with.
yeah. That's where we
Yeah,
interacted. I think the first time is during this time period because I was very involved in that Mayor's Monarch Pledge as well because of the River Authority. So yeah, that's where our integration started happening. Absolutely.
So 18 of the action items were already completed because of the riparian restoration the San Antonio River Authority had undertaken. So really only like 8 more things to do. And so, we were the first. So the National Wildlife Federation, had to have a conference call and say, hey, we need a new category for somebody that will commit to do this. And, of course, San Antonio wanted to be the monarch capital city. And they were like, no, what if another city comes along and does this? Okay, fine, monarch champion. And so they created
Champions.
a new
Yep.
category called the monarch champion. And San Antonio became the first monarch champion city. And I think that was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. 2015. So then the following year, we had, we were looking at our obligations, and one of the things on the list that we still had to do was to have a festival. And so since I kind of, had a lot to do with getting this status, I felt obliged to sort of follow through on the pledge. And I started, asking around town about, look, hey, we really need to do a festival. We said we'd do it. Talked to my friends at the Pearl, which is a really cool local development.
Yep.
Elizabeth Farso and Romero Cavazos, and they're like, yeah, cool. So we ended up starting a festival that we did for, we're still going on. It's not at the Pearl anymore, but for 4 years we did it at the Pearl every year, and it was very successful, and it led us to check that box. And later we also, in 2018 we did a monarch, we did a pollinator habitat initiative, because that was one of the items on the list, that we had to do a local community pollinator habitat initiative. 2018 was San Antonio's 300th anniversary, so we launched an initiative to do what we call 300 for 300, 300 pollinator gardens for San Antonio's 300th birthday. And that, that's still going on. We changed the name because at first it was just San Antonio, but they were like, who cares? I don't care where they do it as long as they do pollinator habitat. So now we've got like yards in, Ontario and Guadalajara registered. I think we have 1,160 or so. And that's on my website at the Texas Butterfly Ranch. Anybody
That's
can
wonderful.
go and register for that and, get on the map. So yeah, that's how the journey's progressed. And like in the course of all of this, I've been writing about, on my website, pollinator advocacy. When we did our festival, we were inviting scientists to come to San Antonio and participate in the festival. I got to know these scientists through the festival in person, and also just, calling them every year for like, hey, what's going on with the monarch migration? And so I had a lot of sources, I had a lot of information, I had a lot of personal experience, and I thought I always wanted to write a book. And so I ended up putting all that into the book, The Monarch Butterfly Migration, Its Rise and Fall.
And I always appreciated the way you approach the festival as well. I again had an opportunity to interact with you over many years when I was there and supported all the amazing things that you were doing with the festival. The interconnectivity of it as well. When you talk about the scientists and the people, I mean, you were really in the spirit of the monarch migration. You were bringing in speakers from Mexico, the United States, Canada. I mean, you were mapping not just for people to understand this magical migration of these insects. Literally, you were also then doing that with your festival by tying it into this international feel. That it just wasn't a San Antonio centric thing or a United States centric thing. It was, this really international approach that is mimicking and is certainly significant and important to the migration itself of the monarch. So I always appreciated that global approach that you took to creating this festival and bringing in these really incredible guests and speakers. And I'm glad. I haven't been in San Antonio for a while. I'm glad to hear that it's still going on. I mean, it was such a fun, educational and engaging activity. So I'm glad that it's still happening. So.
Well, so last year was the first year. In 2023, I handed the festival over to my collaborator, Ashley Bird.
Good.
Of Blue
Yeah.
And she has taken on the festival, and it's been at Brackenridge Park the last 2 years, and it has morphed to the next stage. I mean, it's a very different festival than it was when I was doing it. Totally fine with that. I mean, I think everything has to evolve and change and adapt to whatever the facing moment is. But the festival is much more children and family oriented than it was in the past. So, it'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve, and I'm really proud to see it, continue its life in a new way.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it's still going on, and yeah, Ashley was always a great collaborator and someone to work with as well. So I'm glad to see that it's continuing on, and how it will evolve is they said, it's kind of life evolves. So, so Monika, let's talk a little bit about the book here. I appreciate you kind of getting us the history of how you came to the book, and obviously we want people to go buy it, and so we can't, I don't want you to tell every story that's in the book, but tell me a little bit about the book itself and some of the stories that are in it to kind of tease people to get interested to go get it, and I'm going to keep singing its praises because it's just an enthralling read. So But tell us a little bit about what's in it and what folks can anticipate getting their hands on when they get it.
It's basically a natural history of the monarch butterfly migration from 1976 to the present. And 1976 is where I start because that's when the cover National Geographic featured monarch butterflies on the cover and literally put monarch butterflies on the coffee tables of America for the first time. And I really believe that was sort of the start of our love affair with monarch butterflies. I mean, everybody sees butterflies in their yard, and there's different ones, but really the monarch is the one. It's the most recognizable. It's the most charismatic, and it has this incredible story of this multi-generation migration from Canada to Mexico. The photo of Catalina Trail on that cover is very captivating, and the story of her and the team that was with her and how that all came about is part of the story in the book. It starts with that, and then kind of goes from there to backtracks to some scientific rivalries between Dr. Fred Urquhart, who started the tagging program back in the 50s, and Dr. Lincoln Brower, who passed away recently, and sort of challenged some of the conventional wisdoms. And again, you see this in science, you see it everywhere, but there was a generational shift going on in science where Dr. Fred Urquhart, who was the scientist leading the initiative to figure out where the monarch butterflies go every year. I mean, until 1976, they didn't know where the butterflies went. They didn't know, the details of this incredible journey that monarch butterflies make and the multi-generational aspect of it and the roosting sites in Mexico until those moments in 1975 when Catalina and Ken Brugger, chanced upon the roosting sites after 2 years of driving around the mountains on their motor scooter in their Winnebago. So that was a huge discovery that rocked the world of lepidoptery. But then that led to all these other scientific deep dives, including the one by Dr. Lincoln Brower, who was moving forward with DNA fingerprinting and grinding up butterfly bodies to figure out what the milkweed constitution was. And so there were these two scientists that were kind of like, at odds with each other about, as usual, who's more important, what's the prevailing narrative, who's on top. And I find that so interesting because we see that happen all the time in science. And I'm not a scientist, and I find it, it's just in human nature, and it happens in every profession. With science, you kind of expect more, I guess, or maybe that's not realistic. But anyway, that's a theme throughout the book of sort of scientific rivalries. And then, we get into the drought, and then we also explore, just how human intervention, I have a chapter that I call The Monarchy, which is basically the sort of sphere of influence that determines, the prevailing narrative at any given moment of what we're, thinking and believing about monarch butterflies. Like right now, are they going extinct or not? Is the migration going to continue? And there's all these questions. And there's basically this three-legged stool of influence. You've got academia and the researchers and the nonprofit organizations. You've got journalists, and then you've got, citizen scientists and monarch butterfly aficionados, and they're all interacting with each other on various levels through social media, through email, through research papers, through journalism. And it's just a fascinating, sort of chemistry. And at various moments, one prevails and the other doesn't, and it's shifting and moving all the time. And I think it's a very apt lens for so many things, because we see that in politics, we see that in science, we see that in everything, that there's just all these different points of view. And you start to ask yourself and wonder aloud, truth is a moving target. It depends on where you're sitting. Your reality is based on where you sit, and that's what you're seeing. And for you, that's truth. And so it's just a sort of an exercise in critical thinking, which I think, going forward, I kind of wish I had a little bit more of a delay, although it took 7 years to get this book published. Now that we have AI, if I had to do it again, there would be a chapter on that, because I think AI is going to make all kinds of, impacts on every kind of stuff, including the monarch migration. And so anyway, just trying to figure out what's real and what's not, I think is a big challenge. And I do encourage people to look at all sides of the equation and kind of figure out where they sit and what the truth is for them. But we even get into things like the cartels and avocados, and like,
Yeah.
I have a chapter on, there's all this political competition and control in Mexico where the roosting sites are, because this is a very special place in the Mexican mountains at 10,000 feet. It's mostly controlled by ejidos, which are community organizations that resulted from the Mexican Revolution, and they don't have the typical law applied to them as other parts of Mexico, and so it's very difficult generally to enforce or have law enforcement there. And so there's a bit of a Wild West aspect to this part of Mexico. And that's also a place where same place, the same Goldilocks climate where monarch butterflies thrive, is exactly the same climate where avocados thrive. And avocados are considered, they call it oro verde, which means green gold.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It's a very, very lucrative crop, like way more lucrative than so many other things that are exported from Mexico. And so there's this whole competition to sort of take out trees and plant avocado orchards, and then the cartels are coming in and forcing families to give up their whatever, to even give up control of their avocado orchards to the cartels. They can use it for money laundering. They can use it to make money. And so there's just all this conflict around this part of Mexico. So there's just a lot in there that leads us to the place that we end up at in the book about, talking about are monarchs endangered or not, what's going to happen. And I think it's really interesting that, there was a study just released this week by Andy Davis at the University of Georgia, talking about, every monarch scientist that I've talked to says monarch butterflies are not endangered, but the monarch butterfly migration is endangered. And I think everybody agrees on that. And a recent paper reinforced that. And that's kind of the point I make in my book as well, is that, hey, and you want a hopeful message. I mean, the migration is going away, but that doesn't mean monarch butterflies are going. And that might mean that monarch butterflies are more prevalent in your neighborhood than they were before, because they won't just be there part of the year. They'll be there year round, or they'll be there more often in greater numbers because the climate and everything they need is available locally. They don't need
all
to
these
migrate.
different factors.
So,
right.
There's a huge amount of debate about that as well. I mean, just like there is about, what kind of milkweed to plant. But I like to think that, everyone also agrees that monarchs are highly adaptable and that they are going to do fine in terms of, adapting to the new ways of the world, especially if people plant appropriate habitat and don't necessarily meddle in their business so much.
Yeah. Well, I appreciated just those ties and connections that, someone who's familiar with monarchs, but kind of on a 60,000 foot level, so to speak. I mean, I know their life cycle. I'm understanding of their migratory path. And I kind of a novice in all ways of the monarch. In your book, really, about critical thinking, it really is tying in all of these different aspects that I just, it never occurred to me before. But as you tell these stories about how your guacamole on Super Bowl Sunday might be impacting the habitat of the monarchs, and everything you just talked about with the cartels engaging, like cartels and monarchs, like what's going on? And but you tie all of these things in, and in such a clear way when as you're reading the story, these things that I might not have thought about, you tell the story and you're like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense now. I see how this is all intertwined. I see how this is all connected, and it's a very human story as well, because you get into the lives of some of these individuals that you focus on, and that rivalry that you talked about, the scientific rivalry. I found myself similar to what I think you said, is like, these are scientists, like, why are they doing this? Like I have scientists in my mind at some kind of a higher level, and like, oh yeah, they're just humans. They have egos too. And so it just ties all of these things, that to a passerby like me who loves monarchs but may not fully have ever done a deep dive, you just put it all right there for you and tie all these different stories together, and it's such a great read. And I'd love the fact that you're talking about the evolution of it as well. That monarchs themselves may not go away, but which is great, right? We don't need any more things being extinct because of human activities, but the migration might change, and climate change may mean that they don't have to fly thousands of miles to migrate to winter and summer habitats, for better or worse. That might just be the way things end up being.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I call the monarch, and I look at the monarch. I call it the gateway bug because I think the other really incredible thing about monarch butterflies, because they don't sting, they don't bite, they have this very dreamy flight pattern where they just kind of glide along, and you're like just following them, and they're so enchanting. And once you go and you start to look at monarch butterflies and how the whole system works, and like you used the word interconnected, which is a big theme for me. Like, it's all connected. It's not just about the monarch butterfly; it's about everything. It's all connected. And earlier you mentioned Mexico and Canada when we did our festival. I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of it, is like this creature that starts in Mexico, goes to Canada, comes back, and like it really binds us together in a very meaningful way, with so many different kinds of meaning attached to it. But once you dig in and you start to look at it closely and the interactions of it, and like, okay, it needs these plants, and it needs these plants in the spring, it needs those plants in the fall, and you start to realize the complexity and the sort of engagement of it. It's just like a fascinating way to view the world. And I think that's kind of what happened to me. I mean, like you said, monarch butterflies and cartels. How did that happen? Oh, well, I've got a way to look at that. It all fits together, and it actually has been written about a lot. But I think that's very powerful, and in terms of getting people to think about nature and the ecosystem differently, that's one way to get to people, is to give them the access and the understanding and the engagement that allows them to come in and really see it for what it is.
yes, that's really the whole point of this show, Stories Sustain Us, is exactly that facts and figures are important, right? We need data, we need information, but if you don't share that in a story, in a compelling way, as you mentioned, truth is where you sit. So facts and figures, people can dispute those. People can bring their own facts and figures to an argument that's different from somebody else's facts and figures. But if you can find a way to take your position or your facts and figures and tell it in a story that grabs somebody by their heart as much as it does by their mind, that's when you can get people to move into action. That's when you can get people to change their behaviors and say, oh, maybe I should plant this type of milkweed instead of that, or I should do a pollinator garden instead of a lawn of Augustine grass. These, you can get people to do something different through the power of storytelling, not just by telling them, here's a spreadsheet with data on it. So yeah. I love that that's what your book is doing. It's full of details and data and information, but your storytelling is so enthralling that I don't want to put the book down, and I do want to do something now to make the world a better place, and I really appreciate your abilities and your talent to tell engaging stories around these important issues. So thank you for putting this book out into the world for people like me to enjoy and feel motivated to go do something different now, to change my behavior. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted, before we get to the kind of your call to action, I something I do want to ask you to talk about, because I think it's really important, and you talk about it in the book as well. But for those who may not be familiar with it, you touched on it a little bit, that I-35 corridor, but this Texas flyway, or the Texas funnel, that particular geography that just happens to be there in this, central South Texas corridor. Talk a little bit about that, because it's significant, not only for monarch migration, but for all other types of species. But I think for people who are unfamiliar with that Texas funnel, it's important to know what it is. So can you explain what that is? And you're like right in the heart of it. So
we are right in the heart of it. Well, I mean, there's this the area where we live in San Antonio and here in Central Texas is called the Texas Funnel. You've got the Rocky Mountains on one side, you've got the Gulf Coast, and so you have this sort of natural flyway or passageway for insects and other creatures, birds, all kinds of migrating wildlife to go up and down, from the north to the south, depending on, conditions and their inclinations. In terms of monarch butterflies, we have a population, we call it the eastern population, which is all the monarchs east of the Rocky Mountains typically migrate down to Mexico in the fall. And then there's also a West Coast population that goes up and down the West Coast. And sometimes they, end up mixed in with ours. But generally that Rocky Mountain border is sort of like pretty, it's got to be a pretty intimidating thing to like get over. And so it's sort of just naturally. And then there's, wind patterns and drafts and things like that also affect it. But so that Texas funnel and typically in San Antonio and in the Texas Hill Country in the fall, when monarch butterflies in particular are migrating, it's late in the year, we've had a hot summer, and the only place that you're going to find blooming plants is typically along river systems. And so, for example, in our situation at our place, we're on the Atlanta River, and the only place that anything's flowering because of the dry, hot, long summer in Texas is along the river where there's water. And so you'll have frostweed or goldenrod or different kinds of, native plants blooming. And if naturally the insects and the birds are going to come to that area because that's where the food is. The monarchs and the butterflies are going to come for the nectar. The birds are going to come for the, for the seeds and the insects to eat. The bats are going to come. Other creatures are going to come. So rivers are very important. So we do have a lot of rivers in the Texas Hill Country. So that makes for a very welcoming overnight stop, on their way to and from. And we've had, pretty much acknowledged that, Texas, in terms of the monarch butterfly migration, Texas is the most important state because when monarchs leave Mexico in the spring, after, waiting out the winter and, roosting and then they get the cues from the sun, it's warming up, they start heading north in search of milkweed to lay their eggs on. Texas is very often the first place where that first generation of eggs are laid and starts the next year's migratory cycle. And so typically here where I live, we have, antelope horns milkweed or swamp milkweed. But what's really interesting, and I actually cover this in the book too, is a word that I didn't know what it meant because I'm not a scientist, but phenology, which is basically the study of the timing of the seasons, is getting very much disrupted by climate change. And so, for example, a year or two ago when we had that famous storm Uri in a very warm February, or whenever, a couple of weeks before the storm, I can't remember the month of the storm, but and plants started coming out of the ground, the milkweed started popping up. And then we had this crazy freeze for like several days, which we don't typically experience in Texas. So everything that popped out of the ground that normally would continue to flourish and put out leaves and shoots and flowers and nectar and provide a host plant just got completely shattered by the freeze and was killed in its tracks. And so then when the monarchs, did their usual phenological timing of leaving the roosting sites in March and started moving north, and they got to Texas to lay their eggs, there wasn't any place to lay them because the milkweed had all been stopped in its track by the freeze. So they continue to move north, and then the further north they go, the colder it is, and they're less and less likely to find milkweed as they move north. And so they might die in the process. And so that might, I think we're going to see this year that is going to have, that has affected the migratory population. Because that first generation then sets the stage for the second generation. You have fewer, sometimes they build up, over the course of the summer. And there's a lot of research and evidence that the breeding, summer population of monarch butterflies is pretty stable and is not at risk. It's the migratory population that is suffering so much and suffering declines. But anyway, the point is that with climate change and the timing off of these, formerly syncopated occurrences of things that happen, trees, put out their leaves at a certain time, fruit sets at a certain time, flowers set at a certain time, insects, birds, other creatures expect that and they move in that rhythm. And when that's disrupted, it changes everything and disrupts the cycle. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. But here in the Texas funnel, this year was very weird. We had a very, very wet, I believe it was August. We had a super duper hot September. And like I said, we didn't see a lot of monarch butterflies here in October. I've seen maybe less than 10 in my yard this year, which is pretty severe. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where it ends up.
Well, there's definitely could keep talking with you. There's so much more that you talked about in the book. The disputes over which type of milkweed, the disputes over kind of farm raised butterflies and releasing versus just allowing nature to be nature. There's so much covered in this book that we don't have time to talk about today, but thank you for touching on the significant impacts of climate change as well, obviously tying into sustainability and the kind of foundation of this show as well. There's so much in your book that I just hope folks go out and get it. So what's your call to action? Obviously, tell me and tell everybody how they can get access to your book, where they can buy it. But whatever else you want people to do after hearing or watching this interview, what's your call to action for the audience, Monika?
Well, obviously, the most important thing people can do is to plant appropriate plants, native and well-adapted plants for pollinators and wildlife. And honestly, my book is out. It's available on Amazon, bookstores, online, your favorite bookstore, and you can, order it or go buy it. I have it, but I have another book coming out in May called Plants with Purpose. And it's interesting, again, these things in life we don't plan, but as I was doing the Monarch book, I started, digging into, what can we do? And what we can do is plant appropriate plants that do more than look beautiful. And in that book, I talk about how, you need to look at your yard or your landscape like you're hosting a dinner party. And, you're going to be, shopping for, planning, preparing, cooking, hanging out, cleaning up after these guests in your yard or your dinner party for weeks, months, maybe years. And so if you were going to do that, would you only invite people to your dinner party that were beautiful? Because that has always been sort of the signature call for people who plant plants. And for the nursery industry, it's beauty, color, razzmatazz, how does it look? And so just like Doug Tallamy, who wrote Nature's Best Hope, has done these calls to action about we need to plant plants that serve the ecosystem as well as look good. And so that's kind of the point of my next book. But you can do that right now, like in your own yard today. In Texas, this is the time we plant plants because it's cooling off, and I'm going to the herb market this weekend to buy a bunch of stuff to restock my yard after the brutal summer that we've had. Plant plants that serve multi-purposes. There's lots of plants that are beautiful. There's many, many plants that are ignored because they just, maybe don't have the wow factor that other plants do. But they serve all kinds of incredible purposes. They're host plants. They serve defensive landscaping purposes. They, help avoid erosion because their root systems keep the earth intact. So there's just so many ways to look at plants, and it really annoys me that, we all know the names of a monkey or an elephant, which don't live in our neighborhoods, but we don't know the names of the plants that live in our neighborhoods. And just like with the monarch butterfly, the first step towards conservation or protection is knowing and understanding the organism.
Yeah.
So I really want to encourage
Yep.
people to learn the names of plants and insects and creatures, not just elephants and monkeys and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, but like those plants in your yard, those weeds in the sidewalk, those things that you walk past. Get to know those plants, look into them, and look at what their purpose is in the environment, because they all serve a purpose of some sort, and they have a role to play in the ecosystem. And as we continue to homogenize our ecosystems, that's one of the things that's getting us in so much trouble, with climate change and everything else, and contributing to these declines that we're witnessing of insects and plants and other creatures. So dig into it.
Fantastic. We will put links, make available where folks can get in touch with you, Texas Butterfly Ranch and the book, and looking forward to the Plants with Purpose coming out next spring. And fully understand and agree with everything you just talked about, of encouraging people to really look at ecosystem health, not just, monoculture, this plant's pretty, so I'm just going to plant this one, but what's best for a healthy ecosystem, which is a variety of things, which is, a mixture of things. That's a fantastic call to action. Thank you for sharing that. So, kind of coming to the end, I ask the same three questions of all my guests. We talk a little bit about hope here as we end, and climate change and declining, migration patterns, and everything that we talk about on the show. It's sometimes hard, and the future can sometimes certainly look challenging, if not bleak, given some of the circumstances we're facing. So, in addition to the calls of action, I also like to ask people what they're hopeful for, and looking at hope in the sense of how it's kind of defined by those who study it. It's you have a vision for a better future, and you feel you have some agency to get there, that there's something you can do to help make this vision come a reality. You might not get there. You might fail. You might stumble. It's going to be hard. You can't do it alone, but you have a vision and some sense of agency to get there. So I'm going to ask you three questions, Monika, about what makes you hopeful. And it's kind of rapid fire. Don't think too long about it. Just kind of first gut feeling to the questions, and we'll kind of learn a little bit what is a hopeful future looks like for you. So, you ready for the hopeful questions?
I hope so.
Yes. So the first question is, what is your vision for a better future? It can be for you personally or professionally or for the world. Just what's your vision for a better future?
I think that accepting the fact that change is inevitable is a really important concept to embrace. To quote our presidential candidates, we're not going back. The world is changing. I always get a bit frustrated sometimes in the monarch debate because we see all these organizations talk about, oh, monarch butterfly populations are down 90%, and the statistic that they cite is from 1 year in 1997, which could have just been a moment in time. We don't know if that was an aberration. We don't know if that was typical. That's always the statistic they cite, and it's very dramatic, and it's very motivating, and help save the monarch butterflies. But it's kind of like, wait a minute, that was just 1 year. Why are we citing that? And we're not going back to 1997. We didn't have iPhones in 1997 either. So, the world is changing, and I think we all need to embrace that and accept that and manage for that. And I think when we do that, there will be a whole new world opened up to us that will provide all kinds of new opportunities for us that we just need to make ourselves open to. Stop trying to make things like they used to be, because they're not going to be like that again.
Yeah. So I think you touched on the answer to this next question, by being open to the possibilities, but just to allow you a chance to dig a little bit deeper into your hope for the future, that people accept change and be open to it. Tell me why that's important. I know you touched on it a little bit, but is there any more you want to add to why that's important?
Hope is what keeps us going. We can't just resign ourselves to dismay and despair and depression. We have to keep striving. We have to keep pushing. We have to, look to the future and try to figure out how to make it the best it can be. That is the nature of humanity. And that's what always has kept us going, I think.
Perfect. So the last question, imagine now we're in a future where people are more open to change and accepting that things evolve and are different, and we're looking to possibilities as opposed to lamenting what was lost in the past. So we're in that future now. We're living there. How does that make you feel?
Wow. I think it makes me feel reflective. And while I agree and I try not to be that person that's, waving their fingers saying, I remember when, I do think context is important. And I think history is a great teacher, and history does repeat itself. And hopefully we can apply those lessons going forward and learn from them rather than repeat them.
Right on. Well, Monika, thank you so much for joining me on Stories Sustain Us. I really appreciate all that you've shared. It's been great working with you over the years, and just since I've left San Antonio, it's nice to watch from afar that things are still progressing and moving forward in such a wonderful way. And really excited for your book that's out. Looking forward. I'll get a copy of The Plants with Purpose when that comes out as well. So just keep doing all the amazing stuff that you're doing. You're making the world a better place, and I'm grateful for that. So I'll leave you with the last word.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Stephen. It's been great to be on your show, and I appreciate all your kind words. And I encourage everybody to go out there and plant some native or well-adapted plants.
Perfect. Thank you, Monika. We'll talk to you later. All right.
All right. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Stephen. Take care. Bye.
And that does it for episode 19 of Stories Sustain Us. I want to thank Monika Maeckle for sharing her incredible story with us today. It's truly inspiring to hear how Monika's journey from her immigrant roots and childhood love for the outdoors has led her to become such a dedicated advocate for monarch butterflies and conservation. Monika's insights into the parallels between human and wildlife migration remind us of the shared, interconnected world we live in and the importance of embracing our role within it. Her work in San Antonio with the Mayor's Monarch Pledge and the Monarch Festival clearly demonstrates how community-driven efforts can create meaningful change and inspire others to take action. I also appreciate the wealth of knowledge Monika shared about the monarch migration and the critical role of Texas as a passageway for these beautiful creatures. Monika's call for planting native plants to support pollinators and her emphasis on hope and resilience in conservation efforts remind us that small, thoughtful actions can indeed make a world of difference. And don't forget about Monika's book, The Monarch Migration, Its Rise and Fall. I got my copy right here. It's a wonderful book. I encourage you all to get out there and go buy your copy soon. It's a really insightful book, and I'm telling you, the storytelling in it is simply masterful. Finally, I want to thank Monika for showing us that conservation is more than a cause. It's a community, it's a movement, and it's a powerful story. I'm really grateful for all of Monika's hard work, her top-notch storytelling, and her thoughtful advocacy. And I'm grateful she took the time to come and inspire me today, and hopefully you too. I wish Monika all the best as she continues to create change, one butterfly and one community at a time. And for you, dear audience member, I hope you're inspired and continue creating change in your community, one kind, compassionate, and loving act at a time. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please be sure to tell your family and friends about Stories Sustain Us. I appreciate all the support. The next inspiring episode of Stories Sustain Us will be available on November 19th at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Stephen Shower. Take care of yourself and each other. Take care.